My name is Olivia Hayes, and if someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be sitting in this office, on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, I probably would have laughed. Yet here I am. The skyline stretches endlessly outside my window, the lake glimmers under the late afternoon sun, and the leather chair beneath me feels like a throne I never asked for but fought relentlessly to claim. I smooth the sleeve of my silk blouse, almost absent-mindedly, as my phone buzzes on the desk. The vibration rattles against the polished wood, pulling me out of my quiet rhythm. One glance at the caller ID stops me cold. Richard Bennett. My former boss. The man who once waved off my ideas like they were nothing more than background noise. The man who smiled thinly whenever I dared to speak up in meetings, then credited someone else, usually another man, for the very suggestions I had poured my heart into. For a moment, I just stare at his name glowing on the screen. My chest tightens, a mixture of pride, irony, and the faintest echo of that old hurt. Funny how the past has a way of circling back when you least expect it. I take a sip of my coffee, now lukewarm, slightly bitter, and let the taste ground me. I don't answer right away. Instead, I let the phone keep buzzing, savoring the moment. Because now Richard Bennett needs something from me. And that's the part he never saw coming. 5 years earlier, I was a very different version of myself. I was 24, fresh out of grad school, and brimming with ideas that I thought could change the company I had just joined. I still remember walking into Bennett and Company, consulting for the first time, heart racing, heels clicking against the marble floor, clutching my leather notebook like it was a lifeline. That notebook held everything, sketches of strategies, marketing angles, even little doodles of inspiration that came to me in the quiet moments of the night. It was my treasure chest of thoughts, and I carried it everywhere. But inside that glossy office space, my enthusiasm quickly met reality. Richard Bennett, my boss, was polished, confident, and intimidating in a way that made the room shrink whenever he walked in. At first, I thought he was someone I could learn from. Instead, he became the reason I learned how cruel dismissal could feel. There was one meeting I'll never forget. I had spent days preparing a proposal for a new client engagement strategy, something fresh, something bold. My hands shook as I passed copies around the table, my voice trembling at first, but growing steadier as I spoke. For a brief moment, I felt proud. Then Richard leaned back in his chair, gave me that thin smile, and said, "Interesting thoughts, Olivia, but let's stay realistic. We don't need theory, we need results." He didn't even glance at the rest of my presentation. The room chuckled softly, and just like that, my ideas were reduced to a punchline. I swallowed the lump in my throat, pressed my palms against my notebook under the table, and forced myself not to cry. Weeks turned into months, and the pattern never changed. My words bounced off invisible walls. I watched as male colleagues repeated my suggestions and earned praise for them. Each time, I felt smaller, angrier, more invisible. One evening, after yet another long day of biting my tongue, I sat at my tiny apartment desk, staring at the leather notebook. I remembered my grandmother's voice from years ago. "When they don't listen, you build your own stage." That sentence was the spark. The very next morning, I typed up my resignation letter. My hands shook, my stomach churned, but I knew I had to do it. Richard barely looked up when I handed it to him. "Good luck," he said dismissively, as if I were just another replaceable cog. He didn't know he had just pushed me toward everything he thought I could never achieve. Walking out of Bennett and Company with a cardboard box of my belongings felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing if the ground would ever rise up to catch me. I had no real plan, just a notebook full of ideas, a bank account that made me nervous every time I checked it, and a stubborn determination not to let Richard Bennett's smirk be the final word on my future. The first few months were brutal. My home office was a wobbly IKEA desk crammed into the corner of my one-bedroom apartment. I survived on black coffee and microwave dinners. Some nights, I'd stare at my notebook, questioning whether my ideas were really worth anything. Self-doubt crept in like a thief, whispering that Richard might have been right all along. But every time I thought about giving up, I heard my grandmother's words again. When they don't listen, You build your own stage. I started small, freelance consulting gigs, cold calls that mostly ended in rejection, and meetings at coffee shops where I pitched my ideas with more heart than polish. Slowly, cracks of light appeared. My very first client was a struggling local boutique. I poured everything I had into their marketing strategy, and when their sales doubled in 3 months, the owner hugged me with tears in her eyes. That was my first taste of real validation. Word spread. More small businesses reached out. Then, a mid-sized firm took a chance on me. Each success felt like stacking bricks on a foundation Richard swore I didn't have. I wasn't alone, though. Along the way, I met Claire Donovan, a seasoned executive who had left the corporate world after years of battling the same dismissive culture I had faced. She became my mentor and, in many ways, my shield. Claire taught me how to negotiate without flinching, how to demand respect without raising my voice, and, most importantly, how to believe in my own worth. There were nights we'd sit in her loft office, surrounded by stacks of strategy documents and empty coffee cups, laughing at how unrealistic Richard would have called us. Claire believed in me more than I believed in myself, and that belief carried me through the darkest stretches. Still, the climb wasn't easy. There were proposals rejected, investors who told me my ideas were too ambitious, and months where I barely scraped by. I worked 14-hour days, sometimes crying into my pillow before dragging myself up to keep going. But there were victories too. Landing my first international client. Signing a lease for a real office space with my name, Olivia Hayes Consulting, etched on the frosted glass door. The first time I made payroll for a small but mighty team who believed in my vision. I didn't post much on social media. When my family or old colleagues asked how I was doing, I kept it vague. Busy, working hard. I wasn't ready to show the world what I was building. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew there would come a day when I wouldn't have to tell anyone about my success. They would see it for themselves. The buzzing phone on my desk didn't just carry Richard Bennett's name. It carried years of buried emotions. I let it ring out the first time, but by the second call, curiosity and a hint of poetic justice made me answer. Olivia. His voice was as smooth as ever, but I could hear something new behind it. Strain. We should meet. I have the proposal. I almost laughed. Richard Bennett never proposed anything. He dictated. But I agreed, setting the meeting at my office. My stage. 2 days later, he walked through the glass doors of Hayes Consulting Group. The same man who once dismissed me now scanned the polished marble floors, the sleek reception desk, the awards displayed on the wall. I watched from my office as recognition slowly dawned on him. When he finally stepped inside, I stood from behind my walnut desk. Sunlight streamed in from the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. My team's chatter hummed faintly outside, the sound of an empire he never believed I could build. Olivia, he faltered, eyes flicking from the plaques on the wall to the framed photo of my first team, smiling proudly. You've done well for yourself. Thank you, Richard, I replied smoothly, gesturing for him to sit. But I'm sure you didn't come here just to compliment me. He cleared his throat, tugging at his cufflinks. Your firm, it's making waves. You've taken 3 of our major clients in the last year alone. Impressive work. I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. That silence used to suffocate me in his boardrooms. Now it belonged to him. Finally, he leaned forward. I want to discuss a potential partnership. Bennett and Company and Hayes Consulting. Together, we could dominate the market. I smiled, but it wasn't the nervous smile of the 24-year-old who once sought his approval. This smile carried steel. Richard, I said evenly, when I sat in your conference rooms and presented these very ideas, you told me they were unrealistic. You told me I needed results, not theory. And now those theories are why you're sitting across from me. His face tightened, the arrogance cracking. Perhaps I underestimated you, he admitted. That's why I'm here. We can move past the past. Focus on the future. I rose from my chair, walking slowly to the wall where my leather notebook sat framed in a shadow box. The same notebook he'd ignored, now preserved like a relic of defiance. I tapped the glass lightly. This was my past, Richard. Every idea you dismissed is in here. And my future? I gestured around the office, toward the city's skyline glittering behind me. You're sitting in it. For the first time, Richard Bennett looked small. His voice dropped. So, is that a no? I turned back to him, meeting his eyes without flinching. It's not a no, but it's not a yes on your terms. If we work together, it will be under my conditions. I won't be ignored, dismissed, or silenced ever again. Not by you. Not by anyone. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly, but the defeat in his posture betrayed him. In that moment, the girl clutching her notebook in Bennett and Company's conference room no longer existed. She had grown into a woman who built her own stage and invited the man who once silenced her to sit in the audience. Richard shifted in his chair, his usual boardroom confidence unraveling thread by thread. I could almost see the calculation in his eyes. Measured charm wasn't working, negotiation tactics were failing. He was in my office now, and the balance of power had shifted. I sat back down deliberately, folding my hands on the desk. You came here for a partnership, Richard. But before we even discuss numbers or contracts, there are conditions. He raised his brows. Conditions? Yes. My tone was calm, steady, almost gentle, but with an edge he couldn't mistake. First, your company must stop its toxic culture of silencing people, especially women. I know I wasn't the only one dismissed in your meetings. That ends, starting now. Every voice at your table will matter, or I won't even consider aligning my name with yours. He looked away, jaw tightening. That's a big ask. I leaned forward, my voice soft but cutting. It's not an ask. It's the price of survival in this market. He tried to smile, but it faltered. What else? Second, I continued. If this partnership happens, it will be structured so Hayes Consulting has equal control. I will not be your subordinate, nor your silent advisor. We're equals or we're nothing. Richard shifted again, adjusting his tie. You're asking me to hand over half of my company's power. I didn't blink. No, Richard. I'm asking you to accept reality. You came to me because your company is bleeding clients. My firm is thriving. If you want to save yours, you'll have to do it on my terms. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't mine to carry anymore. Third, I said, my voice softening, this isn't just about business. You owe your people more. Fair pay, genuine mentorship, and opportunities for growth. I built my company on those values, and that's why TalentFlock's here. If you can't commit to that, we have nothing to discuss. For a long moment, he stared at me. The man who once brushed me aside now sat absorbing every word like a chastised student. Finally, he exhaled. You've changed. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm the same woman whose ideas you ignored. The difference is, I don't need your approval anymore. The weight of my words hung between us. Richard finally nodded, slow and reluctant. If I agree to these conditions? I leaned back, letting a small, measured smile curve my lips. Then maybe, we'll talk about partnership. Until then, you'll continue losing clients to me, and I won't lose a minute of sleep over it. His silence told me everything. For once, Richard Bennett had no clever retort, no dismissive remark. And that silence was sweeter than any applause. Richard left my office that day a quieter man than the one who had walked in. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, but there was no trace of the old arrogance in his stride. For once, he understood what it felt like to sit across from someone who refused to be silenced. In the weeks that followed, I heard through the industry grapevine that Bennett and Company had begun making changes. Employees were speaking up more, and for the first time, their voices weren't being brushed aside. I don't know if it was pride, fear, or desperation driving Richard, but I didn't really care. What mattered was that things were shifting. As for me, Hayes Consulting only grew stronger. New clients poured in, drawn not just by our results, but by our values. My team thrived, and every late night, every doubt, every tear I had shed felt like part of the foundation holding us steady. One evening, long after the office had emptied, I sat alone at my desk. The city lights glittered through the window, and on the wall across from me hung that shadow-boxed leather notebook. I stood, walked over, and pressed my palm against the glass. That notebook was more than paper and ink. It was my grandmother's voice, my own resilience, my proof that silence could be broken. I thought about the young woman I had been, trembling in a conference room while Richard smirked at my ideas. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her, hold on. One day, he'll have to listen. A soft laugh escaped me. Because it was true, he had listened. Not because I begged him to, not because I fought for his approval, but because I built something he couldn't ignore. I returned to my desk, picked up my pen, and jotted a few notes in a fresh leather-bound book. A new chapter, a new set of ideas, ones no one would ever dismiss again. Looking out at the skyline, I whispered the words I had waited years to say, not with bitterness, but with pride. He ignored my ideas once. Now, my ideas are the reason he can't ignore me ever again.